Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Encores Club. We made it to 7 with your two ragged tigers, Rhonda from Daily Durani and me, Velvet Rebel. Our special guest today is Gemma Marmalade, a British artist, academic of performative speech arts, and raconteur who adds the hyper to hyperbole. She knows more about Las Vegas than me, and I've lived here for a decade. And at the end of today's show, she has a musical surprise for us, so don't go anywhere. Both bands we are discussing today hail from your island paradise, so thank you for representing Great Britannia today. How are things over there in England?
Well, thank you, Jason. Yeah, it's nighttime here as we do this, so we are literally night and day today. So yeah, everything's good in the little island that is Great Britain. Just about.
Well, we are excited to have you. First up today is Doppelganger from She's Got Claws, named after a Gary Newman song. The band name definitely indicative of what the music delivers. Like Newman, the songs are full of detailed synth layers, driving rhythms. Michi Liu provides the vocals and electronics, while Chris O'Ten adds the key ingredient, for me at least, that makes this album different within the genre, and that is killer live bass. Not coincidentally, the album has a few tracks produced by OMD's Andy McCluskey, one of my favorite bass players ever. Let's have a quick listen here.
I don't need your adulation. Don't dress me up.
And that was one of the new songs from She's Got Claws. Like I said in the intro, I love the bass lines. For me, the fact that there's some live bass lines happening here really makes the album a little more interesting than a lot of synth pop stuff happening. For me, one of the songs right out of the gates I love, Lying in the Dust. It has that Kraftwerk propulsion with the synths and the rhythms. And the more I listened to this album, it actually reminded me of an album that came out a few years ago by a band called Roman Remains, who I think I saw open for Gary Newman, actually. So it's all kind of interconnected there. A lot of interesting stuff there happening for me. It's an easy listen if you like synth pop, you like stuff that borders on the industrial, if you're a fan of garbage. This is definitely going to kind of replicate some of the sounds you like. Gemma, you're coming at this from a slightly different perspective than me. So what do you think?
Well, I would say that it's really great to see She's Got Claws and the persona of Michi Liu as this channeling, this kind of aesthetically Lennox type character. It's got all of that 80s edge that you've just referred to, you know, that kind of industrial feel. There's a sense of androgyny, and of course this recent and very timely reliving of this sort of 80s aesthetic is definitely of the moment. So it's great to see those kind of powerful roles and these thumping bass lines having such a precedent, especially with a female artist. For me, actually, overall, despite all of those things, I found actually a lot of what it purports to be actually, for me, kind of fell short. In some senses, it felt, kind of superficial in many ways, which is a big disappointment because I'd really like to sort of say otherwise. For me particularly, I was really interested in how the voice is actually presented I think actually in every track of the album. Interesting that the title Doppelganger and this play of kind of split or dual identities, when you've got this very kind of technically effective voice to create this kind of machine-like sonic aesthetic. The trouble is for me is that I feel like it doesn't deliver in what all of that promises to be. Like Laurie Anderson, for example, for me is such an incredibly important female vocal artist who really utilized the idea of the technically effective voice in such incredible ways that was just groundbreaking, and really played for me with a sense of integrity to the idea of gender play, of the ambiguity of what the voice is, the authority of the voice, and that's something I hold in such regard. So for me, She's Got Claws portends to be those things, but the substance just isn't there for me, and that's a great shame. But across the album, there's a strong stripe of what it could be, but for me, unfortunately, it didn't rock my world.
Understood. And you're coming at it from totally different perspective for me because the first thing that grabbed me was the production of it, and the rhythms and the way they're presented. Just it's got a little more muscle than a lot of the synth pop that's been happening lately. So it pulled me in. But now that I think about what you're saying, is like, have I really engaged it lyrically and the way the voice is presented as deep as I should have? Maybe I haven't yet, and maybe that's something that'll open up to me a little later. Rhonda, what's your perspective?
It's interesting because listening to all this, I'm like, I thought I had a pretty good command of the album, and it turns out that no, I did not. um, you know, when I started listening to it, the very first thing I thought of was Gary Newman, which makes perfect sense. I mean, it's the thing I like is that you do have all of that 80s aesthetic, but it's not so shallow in that it's not, and what I mean by that is not the meaning of the music. I mean just the music itself, like the what you're audibly hearing. You know, it's not at the top, it's not at the bottom. There's a full range happening there, and it's because there's bass to balance what's on top. And I appreciate that because a lot of production today, it's either all in the bass and there's no melody, or there's some like form of melody taking place at the top of the music with nothing to support it. So as far as musically goes, yes, I thought the album was done well. A lot of artists that are new, they tend to it tends to sound very raw, very unpolished, and I didn't feel this at all. But to be fair, neither Michi or Chris are new to this game. They both have been in the industry for a very long time, and so I would expect that of them. I liked the edge that the album had. I'm curious to see where they'll go from here. A couple of standouts that I appreciated was Lying in the Dust, and I actually really liked Number Station, which is unlike me, but I liked it. A lot of their music sounded a lot like Kraftwerk to me too. I mean, I could pick out various. A lot of the synth was just, I'm like, oh, I hear Kraftwerk in there in the background, and that was fun. And I want to kind of clarify that when I think even when you, Jason, you pick out band names that it sounds like, or when I pick out band names, it's not because I'm trying to find that 80s band that it identifies with. It's so that way then our viewer can kind of understand where we're coming from, so that they are like, oh wait, I like Kraftwerk, or oh, I like the Killers, I'm going to go and listen to them. That's why we do that. So I just want to make that clear, because somebody had asked me, or do you guys just try to find an 80s band it identifies with? And that's not really what we're trying to do.
No. And if you're a fan of Britney Spears, there's a song on this album called "Dreaming My Eyes Open," and I can't get it out of my head because it reminds me of "Until the World Ends" by Britney Spears, and obviously a lot more less mainstream pop. But there's something in that song, and I'm like, man, it just tweaked it a little bit. This is a Britney Spears song waiting to happen. It's a club banger, if you want to say that. But so yeah, interesting.
Very strange that you would say that, Jason, because that
I don't know
same
why I'm making
song,
Britney Spears comparisons, but that's where it's
no,
at for me. So.
no, but that same song, I was playing it, and all of a sudden I'm like, I could hear Britney Spears coming out of that, but I couldn't put my finger on the song. But you named the song, because I am fairly familiar with her catalog. So yeah, that's
We all love Britney. Let's just admit it. So.
Good call, Jason.
So we're going to leave London now, and if I can get my UK geography right, we're going to head northwest to Cardiff for our next band. Rhonda, who are we talking about?
Yes, we are talking about Private World. This is a brand new band. In fact, Aleph, which is the album we're going to discuss, is their debut. This is a project headed by Tom Sanders and Harry Jowett. I have something written that I stole directly from. Oh, thank you for the visual. And I'm not surprised you bought it. I'm not even surprised.
Or I even heard a song. I ordered it because they said it sounds like Roxy and Spandau. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna take. I stole it directly from them, their words, because I think I couldn't have described it. Um, the duo aims to transfer composition, texture, and spatial balance to the pop discourse with their music. And as I said, Aleph is their debut. And I think what I want to do is just ask you both whether you think that they succeeded or not.
Well, let's listen to a track and make sure everyone has a chance to hear it. So here you go, one of the new songs from Private World.
I want to paint it with your hands. I want to
Right, that was the one of the new songs from Private World off of their album called Aleph. Gemma, what did you think?
Well, okay, so I actually had a really good time with this album, and these Cardiff boys, which actually are, although we're in a little island here right now, they're still in another country, and big up to Wales and total respect for their kind of identity. So I'm not going to try and kind of usurp them as the English generally tend to do, but for me, this was a really kind of poetic album. I really liked the flow. There was a real sense of a kind of a conceptual framework to the whole experience. And actually, the first track of the album, and it's one of those albums you have to listen to in the order in which it's published. You can't just kind of sample in with the tracks, because I see it as a kind of a sound piece and conceptualized in that way, which I think was great. But I felt like I was in a kind of a really chic 80s film at the start of the album. And for me, the whole idea of, that kind of art school thing, which is definitely my bag, the kind of cinema verite sort of flavors kind of coming through, these kind of conceptual ideas of truth and image. I was just like really inspired by it. And I think that kind of ambient music, this very kind of chic, fashion, but not superficial. It actually to me had a real sense of conceptual, psychological, and etherealness that just made it feel like a really enjoyable, kind of existential ride of an album. So for me, this was this synthy, tonal, textured, multi-layered, but still very accessible sound for me was really great.
I have to agree. For me, this album could have really easily fallen into cliche with the musical framework they were using, but
Oh, yes.
ultimately it holds together beautifully. I mean, I cannot get over how many times I've gone back and listened to this album. I love that A Private World is the intro track, just this little instrumental piece. It's almost like
Mhm.
this little it's like just crossing over into a different world. And I love the album title. I believe it means one with God in Hebrew. I mean, there's a lot of concepts that work here. Musically, the styling is very 80s era Roxy music, which I know a lot of art art music purists maybe didn't like where Roxy went in the 80s with the smooth kind of Brian Ferry crooner thing. But for me, I love that era of Roxy music.
Mhm.
There's an album that came out in the late 80s from the UK that I absolutely still love. And I'll take the flack for it because I know it's probably not cool, but there's a band called Breathe, and they had a few hit songs. Hands to Heaven was amazing,
Yeah,
but that
yeah.
all that jazz record again, kind of sophisticated, new soul pop, some ambient sounds. It just there was a lot happening there that maybe people didn't get at the time, but I thought it was a great record. And for me, Private World's kind of doing the same thing. And there's a lot more here than you might think at first glance. And man, the album promo they talk about Spandau Ballet and bands like that. So I'm like, I'm interested, but I think
Mhm.
it's completely different than bands like Spandau Ballet. And you think about True and Gold. There's a
Mhm.
lot more depth to this. It's not just pop songs. They really are trying to do something a little more serious with the music, and I think they pulled it off perfectly with the
Yeah.
production.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. It absolutely has all of that kind of DNA that you've sort of just talked about, Roxy Music. There was a bit of kind of, I felt like a bit of a Peter Gabriel vibe
yeah,
actually in part,
definitely.
in a very distant sort of a way, a tenuous way. But yeah, for me, it was both accessible as a sonic experience, but also had that kind of integrity that, as opposed to the other album from She's Got Claws, which was promising so much, but kind of, didn't deliver. This for me is the complete flip side.
And I was a little surprised. It's a debut album, like Rhonda said. I mean,
Yeah.
to hit
Me
this on
too.
your first album is incredible. I mean, Rhonda, were you impressed?
Yeah. So I have to say that from the moment that I heard the intro, Private World, I knew that this was going to be special because um, the, it was perfect. I mean, it just kind of brought you right into where they wanted you to focus, and I appreciate that about an instrumental because not very many bands do them well. And one thing that I noticed that neither of you have mentioned, so I'm almost afraid to say, I honestly thought that this sounded so much like early Aha. I couldn't, I mean, it's on
Yeah,
a different level, but musically it's right there.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I was shocked. I was like, wow, this deserves my attention. And they got it. I really think that they have something more going on though, because just as you think you have this band figured out, they come out with this something special, which is I don't know how many tracks in. It's probably what 4 or 5 tracks in, and it's completely different than what you heard before. And yet it's got this great groove to it, and there's some bass in there, and I appreciated that. The production is supreme. I would never have guessed this was a debut album, not even.
I'm
So
glad you mentioned Something Special because to me, Something Special is one of those, that's the hit single on the
that's
album.
the hit.
If the music industry still had singles and videos and all that, but there's something about that song immediately, I'm like, oh, wow. I can
Yeah.
Mhm.
follow that.
That's
It,
so true. That's so true. And that, Rhonda, you're right. That reference to Aha, and you've got those kind of similar, kind of conceptual frameworks, and this sort of intellectualism that Morton Harkett was actually really good at delivering, that has that kind of sophisticated but not kind of, not in your face, not aggressive, not bourgeois. It just has this kind of sort of spiritual sense, and of course, the reference to the album Aleph, this very old kind of Hebrew notion of purity and reflection and oneness. Really kind of draws this album for me as almost like one continual sound piece rather than separate tracks that you download. But yeah, agreed. That's a good point.
it's interesting because I really look at this album as, although it is a debut album, and the guys, I mean, you can see it in their video. They're young, they're old souls, man. They
Oh,
really they hit something. I hope that they continue to drive that out in their music going on because I think they hit upon something very special for sure.
Well,
yeah.
if you're on the fence about Private World, don't be.
Don't be.
And the vinyl production on this is one of the more beautiful vinyl records I've picked up in recent times. Absolutely beautifully clean pressing. Sounds pristine on a turntable. So one I'm a big fan of. As we always do in the Encores Club, we have to pick one of the two albums. For me today, when I first started listening, I was like, oh, it's definitely going to be She's Got Claws. But over the last few weeks, as I've really given my attention to both, I got to say Private World's the album for me that's going to stick around a little bit longer. How about you, Gemma?
Well, I think I've pinned my
I
clothes
think we know where you're
on this one. I mean, we are talking about here, emerging, artists. I mean, obviously, most definitely for Private World, and obviously, She's Got Claws has, Michi Lou and the team around, that music identity, has some more experience behind it. But still, nonetheless, this is a kind of a new body of work for them. So, and these are still, comparison to me, young people who are kind of making this work. So absolute kudos to kind of both sides of the fence. But for me, it's Private World, a whole 9 yards. These guys have got such a sense of trajectory for future works, and that's breathtaking.
Rhonda, do they get the sweep?
You know what? They do get the sweep this week. Yes. I do want to say that I did appreciate She's Got Claws. I really did. I would like to see them go a little bit deeper into what they're trying to sell. And I would also, caution them that sometimes it really can be too much. And so, don't be pastiche. Don't do that. Be careful. But Private World, you know what? They blew me away. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do next.
Awesome. And on Encores Club, we are always on the lookout for new music for you to check out. And we are very excited today. We're going to actually have a world premiere here. Music that just came out. We're going to play the video as we wrap up today's show. Gemma, tell us what we're about to see.
Well, so this piece of music is by, again, a very young emerging artist. And this piece of music is called Schopenhauer. Now that really I've kind of gone down a philosophy hole with talking about Private World. And obviously Schopenhauer for me has that connection to, the idea of Kantian philosophy and pessimism. And I think that this piece of music, for me, by Oscar Quick, again, hailing from the UK, really describes that typically British sense of, dealing with the rain, dealing with the cold, dealing with the strife, and this kind of philosophical and existential pessimism that, of course, Arthur Schopenhauer, the very depressed philosopher would, the work refers to. So for me, the idea of this kind of young angst being channeled through this spoken worded, kind of synth style music, again, having all of those kind of textures of the 80s. For me, I love spoken word, the idea of the application between poetry, between speech and then music. And the way the lyrics reflect as well on stages of one's life, which has that, to me, the idea of experience and growth. So this is something that I really enjoy, and I hope that other people will like it too, and we'll find out more about Oscar Quick and this very early stage of his career.
Excellent. Thank you again for joining us on Encores Club. Rhonda and I will see you again soon. A special thank you to you, Gemma. And we leave you today with new music from Oscar Quick. Enjoy. Take care.